Okay, we're here with our student Rita to talk about unit rates, and we're going to be focusing on fractional unit rates and then how to use that to compare quantities. You ready to go, Rita?
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at a problem here. Shelby hikes 4/3 miles in 1/2 hour. What is her unit rate in miles per hour? Wow, so now we're starting to deal with some fractions here. This is going to make unit rates just a little bit more difficult, but what we do is the same exact thing. We want miles per hour, so we're going to set up a fraction where we have the miles part divided by the hours part. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to put 4/3 miles over 1/2 hour. Okay?
Okay.
Now, what we can do is we can separate out the numbers portion of this from the units portion. Okay, so let's just talk about the numbers first. What is this problem here? It's 4/3 over 1/2. What's that like? 4/3, is it multiplied by 1/2 or subtract 1/2? What is it?
4/3 divided by 1/2.
Divided by 1/2, right? So we're going to go ahead and set up the problem a little bit differently like that. So can you see that this right here is the same as this? We're just taking the 4/3 and the 1/2 and we're doing what they're saying they're doing over here in the fraction, dividing.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now we have 4/3 divided by 1/2. We know that when we divide by a fraction, we turn it into a multiplication problem. So that's the same as 4/3 times 2 over 1. Following so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Then what's 4 times 2?
8.
8. And what's 3 times 1?
3.
Okay. So then we can just simplify this to 8/3 miles per hour. And this is a unit rate because we're talking about how far Shelby can go in 1 hour. And she can go 8/3 miles in 1 hour. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, why is that useful? Well, now that we know how fast her unit rate is, we can ask the question, at that rate, how many miles can Shelby hike in 6 hours? Okay? So in 1 hour, it would be 8/3 miles. In 2 hours, it would be double that. In 3 hours, it would be triple that. So in 6 hours, what would we do with this 6 and the 8/3 to find the answer?
You would multiply 6 by 8/3.
Very good. So we can say, okay, 6 hours times 8/3 miles per hour. And you could do this a number of ways. You could multiply the 6 times 8, and then the 6 is like 6 over 1. So you could do 1 times 3 and then simplify. I like to kind of cancel out right now and realize that the 3 and the 6 have a greatest common factor of 3. So we can say 6 divided by 3 is 2, and 3 divided by 3 is just 1, so we don't need to write anything. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So then we have 2 times 8, which is just
16.
16, and these hours kind of cancel out too. That's a hint for something you'll learn later. But it's just 16 miles. Okay? So in 6 hours, Shelby can hike how far?
16 miles.
16 miles. And we used her unit rate to figure that out. Okay? Now, one of the things that we learned about doing here with this unit rate where there's fractional units is we learned how to kind of compare things that are in fractional form, and that's what we're going to do over here with comparing quantities. So a very similar thing. So let's read this problem. You have a mug and a thimble, a little thimble that goes on the end of your finger if you're sewing things. So the thimble is a lot tinier. The mug holds 14/3 ounces of some liquid, and the thimble holds 2/9 ounces. You wouldn't normally put liquid in a thimble, but it could hold that much liquid. How many times more liquid can the mug hold than the thimble? So this is a kind of a head scratcher of a problem. You say, well, gosh, do I add, subtract, multiply, divide? When you're comparing how many times, you're trying to figure out the kind of what a multiple of one thing is of another thing. So you want to put the greater quantity that you're finding how many times it is of the other thing on top. And it says how many times more liquid can the mug hold than the thimble. So the mug is the greater thing here. So we're going to set up a fraction of fractions that's 14/3 ounces over 2/9 ounces. We're comparing the amount the mug holds of 14/3 ounces to the amount that the thimble can hold of 2/9 ounces. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about ounces over ounces. So there's not going to be a unit here. There's not going to be a rate of something per something. These ounces are just going to go away. And we're just going to get a number of times. Okay. It's just going to be a number. Follow?
Yep.
Okay. So now with 14/3 and divided by 2/9, we can write it that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we're going to turn this into a multiplication problem. What should I write then?
14/3 times 9 over 2.
Okay, very good. Okay, now let's go ahead and do some canceling out. You can see that this 14 and this 2 can cancel out a little bit. They're both divisible by 2, right? So what's 14 divided by 2?
7.
7. So we can cross those out and have a 7. And 2 divided by 2 is just 1, so we don't have to write anything. How about a little bit of cancellation here? What should we cross out and what should we write?
They're both can be divided by 3. So we can cross out the 3, and that would be 1. And cross out the 9, and that would be 3.
Very good. Does that make sense there?
Yeah.
I didn't bother to write the 1s, but that's just because we don't really need them, right? And then 7 times 3 is?
21.
21. Okay. So what does that mean in the context of our problem up here? What does this 21 mean?
It means that the mug could hold 21 times more than that thimble.
Right. So the mug holds 21 times as much liquid as the thimble. If you were to fill up the thimble 21 times and each time you pour it into the mug, you would, on the 21st time, you would fill up the mug. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now you know how to use fractional unit rates and also how to compare quantities with fractions. Great job.